Welcome to the What's Next Living Longer, Better, Smarter podcast. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with Mary Furlong. Hi, Mary.
Great to be here, Fred.
This podcast is made possible by the support of AARP. Our topic, older women and financial security. Our guests are Nancy LeaMond, Executive Vice President and Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer at the AARP, Claudia Goldin, Henry Lee Professor of Economics at Harvard University and author of the upcoming book, Career and Family, Women's Century-Long Journey Toward Equity. And we are also happy to have with us the co-founder of GetSetUp, Lawrence Kosick. Mary, women have been facing an uphill battle for financial security that starts with the gender pay gap, continues as they struggle to care for children and aging loved ones while making ends meet, and ends with longer lifespans and higher healthcare costs, but less savings and lower Social Security benefits than men.
Nancy, we want to turn to you first. You've been focused for some time now on the particular challenges that women face in terms of their long-term economic security. Tell us what you've learned. Why is it harder for women to be on solid financial ground as they age?
Well, Mary, thanks for having me as well. And I think Fred covered some of those points a minute ago. Look, across the country, women are falling behind on their road to a secure financial future. It starts with that first job, where on average, women earn less than their male counterparts, a pay gap that persists and compounds over time, making it hard to set aside money for the future. Overall, women are earning roughly 82 cents for every dollar earned by men. And there's an even bigger difference when we look at both race and ethnicity. Fast forward a few years from a first job, and you have women taking time off or even giving up their jobs to have children and care for them because, in part, childcare is so expensive and often very hard to find. And then when and if they get back in the labor force, they're years behind their male counterparts in terms of both earnings and cumulative savings. And then just as women are reaching their peak savings year, they come into this period we call the caregiving years. Not that there aren't caregivers at younger ages, but for sure at age 50 or so, we're finding more and more women caring for their aging parents, spouse, or a friend. And then again, they may take time out of the workforce to do this, or they may cut back their hours, or indeed may turn down a promotion, may not be able to travel as much in a job as they did before. And so all of this obviously affects their salaries. It affects how much they're able to save for retirement and their Social Security benefits. One study we looked at estimates that a woman taking care of an aging parent could lose $120,000 in lifetime earnings if she does cut back on her working hours, and $142,000 if she stops working altogether. These are big numbers, and it means that older women in particular are struggling with their financial security.
Claudia, as an economic historian and a labor economist, and a new book, your research covers a wide range of topics, including the female labor force, the gender gap in earnings, and income inequality. Can you share with us your concerns in these areas, and is it a crisis?
Well, these, Mary, are overlapping and related issues. Perhaps the largest of them is economic inequality. We were once a nation that grew together. There were differences in family income and individual earnings, to be sure, but as the nation grew economically, all boats were lifted to the same degree, and that process slowed in the early 1980s. And rather than turning around, it got a lot worse. The rich have gotten a tremendous amount richer. The top 5% of families once had an income that grew the same as the median family. But in the last several decades, incomes of families in the top 5% have grown more than 3 times the rate of the median family. Larry Katz and I have demonstrated that much of the rise of economic inequality can be traced to the slowdown in education and an increase in the economic returns to post-secondary schooling. But in the last decade or so, that explanation, while still important, is less important than it had been. The enormous growth at the very top requires other reasons. For example, a shift in the norms of pay for CEOs and a large change in the structure of the economy with increasing concentration of industry are some of the new and more disturbing causes. This is all related to the labor force more generally and to health issues such as deaths of despair, because good jobs are fewer. The fraction of prime-age men actively working decreased long before the Great Recession, long before the pandemic. It is among the most important issues of our day. And now, what about women? The labor force participation rate of women rose for decades at all ages, but in the late 1990s, it stopped rising with one big exception. Women in their 50s and older increased their labor force participation rates. One of the reasons for the plateau in the labor force participation rate of women is the same as the one I just mentioned regarding men: rising inequality and the stagnation of real wages for most. But another part, and one that has been emphasized in the current pandemic era, and one that was just mentioned by Nancy, is that women with children take out, even highly educated women, take out more time of their workforce years in the US than they do in some other nations that have more generous childcare subsidies and better preschool and after-school programs. The double burden on women makes work more difficult for them. But even that issue is more complicated and gets to the final point that you mentioned, the gender gap in earnings. Why can't dual career families share equally in the joys and the duties of parenting? And the reason concerns what is termed greedy work. If they did that, if they shared 50-50, they would be leaving money on the table, a lot of money. The worker who works all hours, is on call all the time at the office, is the one that gets the really big rewards. But if there are children, someone has to be on call at home, and that person generally also has a paying job. That person will take a position that has more flexibility, is less demanding, and in consequence pays less. There is some specialization in households with caregiving needs, and women are generally the one who is the on-call at-home person. And that is a major part of the gender gap in earnings. Mary ended with the question, is this a crisis? My answer quite simply is, if it is a crisis, it's been going on for decades.
Nancy, we want to give you the opportunity to jump in here and maybe have a conversation here with Claudia. And we also want to bring up the issue of the pandemic and what has that done to this whole picture?
Well, certainly the pandemic has made the situation worse. We've seen unemployment during the pandemic fall more heavily on women. We looked at the jobs report, for example, in December, and one analysis showed that job losses were felt almost exclusively by women at that stage. And AARP also did a study that showed women accounted for virtually all of the increase in unemployment for workers over the age of 55. We're all seeing stories about women who have either lost their jobs or voluntarily left the workforce. In fact, yesterday's New York Times had a series of profiles of women who had either started their own business or were in jobs and had just had to stay home, taking care of children, taking care of parents because they couldn't find the support during the pandemic. So we know the pandemic has had a major impact. And I think what everybody's looking at now is what will happen next? What will happen as the economy starts to reopen, and how will women fit in that?
Claudia?
So, thanks. The pandemic has been both a health and an economic catastrophe. We really never had anything like this before. Older Americans and persons of color have been disproportionately impacted in terms of health. We all know that. They've experienced a far greater fraction of the deaths from COVID adjusted for age. Blacks have had double the COVID death rate of whites or Asians. Excess deaths have been disproportionately in the older age group. In late April of 2020, at sort of the peak of these problems, among the 15 to 64-year-old group, there were 38% more excess deaths, but there were 54% for those 65 to 74. But the good news, really amazing news, is today there are really almost no differences by age. And in fact, among the oldest group, it's actually lower than among the younger group. But that's the health side. What about employment? Let's do some numbers for older women. A woman in her early 60s had a labor force participation rate of 40% in 1990. Just before the pandemic hit, she had a labor force participation rate of almost 60%. That's women working longer. And she had an employment rate of about 55%. Women really have been working a lot longer in their lifetimes. Now, what happened in the pandemic? In April of 2020, her employment rate fell by 10 percentage points to 46%, although her labor force participation rate didn't fall at all. As of today, once again, much better news. Women in their early 60s are back to almost where they were before around March of 2020. And so that is some good news that there has been a certain amount of recovery. That does not mean that there wasn't and still isn't a lot of pain and suffering.
So Nancy, talk a little bit about some of the things AARP is doing to help women build financial security and education, because it's in some cases people didn't have the skills or the knowledge about financial resilience and planning.
Yeah, sure. Well, as you know, AARP works both as an advocate and an educator, and we've been very active. I think what we're seeing right now in the political world is a focus on these issues, driven, of course, by the pandemic. I think, first of all, we're seeing a lot of discussion about affordable childcare, about paid leave, and other workforce policies. And these are taking place not only in legislative arenas, but also in the companies themselves. Second, we're seeing movement on legislation related to age discrimination. The House passed a bill last year on age discrimination. We're hopeful that this year there'll be a success in both the House and the Senate. We continue to focus on Social Security. That's not an issue that's front and center, but let's not forget that it is the bedrock of women's retirement security. According to the Social Security Administration, nearly half of all unmarried women over the age of 65 who get Social Security rely on those benefits for 90% or more of their income. And so we are ever vigilant about Social Security. And finally, we're seeing efforts to amplify the debate about retirement security. We've worked over the last 6-7 years across the country and the states on a work and save agenda. This is to enable people who go to work to be able to put money into a retirement plan. So we're very active on that, active on paid leave, active on a family caregiver tax credit proposal that is now before the Congress, and much more. That's on the advocacy front, and it's a very, very busy advocacy world right now. In terms of education, we continue to provide the kinds of educational programs to our members and others so that they understand more about retirement security, about Social Security. We opened an online small business resource center for the many women entrepreneurs, particularly older women, and will continue to kind of engage in that way as women in particular are starting to get back into the labor force or think about what they need to do. If they're going to live a lot longer, they're going to need to be working longer.
We've certainly been excited to see the number of women becoming entrepreneurs. Let's bring in our third guest, Lawrence Kosick from GetSetUp. And Lawrence, you have kind of a revolutionary startup and a really interesting perspective on these skills women need.
Yeah, Mary, thank you very much for having me today. And Nancy and Claudia, thank you for all the work that you do to create awareness for this very important issue. I've learned a lot of new facts and figures just from joining this podcast today. As Mary mentioned, GetSetUp is a social learning platform for adults over 50. So if you're a woman in the workplace, either currently or desiring to be, we might be one of the helpful resources for you. And GetSetUp has taken a different approach. So we believe that adults our age, my age, learn better from doing than by simply watching a video. And so this is particularly helpful when finding a job because we are very much on sort of the front lines of this problem and actively helping, women over 50, over 60, reskill and upskill to find that next new job. And we really do try to think about how to reduce the stress. Because when you're thinking about sort of this demographic, they're oftentimes managing these multi-generational households, and there are significant challenges around doing that, the finances, caring for, younger generation, older generation, and how to balance all of this. And so, our learners, oftentimes they're over 50, they're over 60, they're over 70. We endeavor to help them with the soft skills. Often there's other places that they can go if they need to, get another diploma, certification, or degree. I think the place where we can help, and we have, of our 400 live interactive classes, at least 100 of them would be sort of in the job, reskilling, upskilling, motivation, sort of mental health-ish space. But we help them with the soft skills because looking for a job now is very different than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. And so what are the skills that we need to help with if they're looking for something new? Where do they look? How do they get started looking? Are they ready, from both an analog and digital perspective, meaning, do they know how to update that paper resume, what it should look like, what it should say? And then LinkedIn, do they know the power of creating a good profile there so that they can then connect with friends, family, neighbors, and loved ones? Because the majority of job opportunities are still done by reference and by introduction. So helping them with these basic sort of soft skills on the front lines has really been quite helpful. And I didn't say this, but it's something that we're proud of. We just passed 1 million active monthly users, and 75% of them are women. So we are truly impressed by the number of women who are coming to the platform and pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and saying, listen, we have to figure this out and we're ready to do the work.
So this has grown internationally, but also you've had some states want to license the platform and use that for economic development. Is that correct?
That is true. We're proud to say that we're working in 26 different states at the area agency, city, or at the state level itself, including Michigan, New York, Washington, and many others. So yes, we're out there and trying to help as many older adults as we can, and again, most of them women.
So let's talk a little bit about Washington and the new infrastructure and the American Rescue Plan. So would any of the panelists want to talk about the legislation pending and economic development?
It would be really nice if there was a lot of information to have. So you can look all over and you can find that there are two large areas of interest in the discussion. having to do with what we've been talking about in the American Rescue Plan and Infrastructure Bill. One is education. The other is care. And let me focus on the latter because it will impact older Americans more today. And that program would expand access to long-term care services under Medicaid through home and community-based services. And part of the plan, and that's the stuff that's really hard to get your hands on because it's still being crafted, of course, would upgrade the training of healthcare workers, and another part would expand the current programs that provide home-based services. And let me say that many of these programs, and Nancy sort of alluded to this, help three kinds of women. They help the woman who is the home healthcare worker herself. They help the woman who is the daughter who is taking care of the patient. And they help the patient who's disproportionately going to be a woman. So it really is, these are what we think of as win-win because it ups the skills of the home healthcare worker, giving her more income, giving her a better life in her future. It then frees the daughter so the daughter can go out and get a real job and not have one that's only just part-time. She pays taxes, and it gives the patient the ability, the dignity of being at home and not having to go into a nursing home. Finally, in terms of the two large interests of this bill, the other one is education. And of course, that one, although it may not benefit the older American today, benefits future older Americans. And that's something that we always remind people, one day you're going to be there too, hopefully. And that would be, that's the one that modernizes public schools, invests in community college infrastructure, and upgrades child care facilities.
Nancy?
Well, Claudia's given a great description, and it is important to note, as she did, that it's certainly a work in progress right now. President Biden's proposal is a really important one. He redefined infrastructure with this proposal for legislation beyond rivers, roads, and bridges, and the infrastructure of care in America. And that's a very important concept. Right now in the legislative arena, there's kind of a bifurcation taking place of whether we should just talk about traditional infrastructure or more broadly. I think that's a kind of definitional debate right now. There is no doubt that they'll be focused both on rivers, roads, and bridges, and also on the caring economy. Very important in terms of the amount of money that's being proposed to be put into home care. And let's face it, the home is the new healthcare institution. Virtually nobody wants to be in a nursing home, though many people have to be. And we've tended to say, okay, people can stay at home without thinking about what that takes. And that takes a financial support system through health insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, and it requires people, as Claudia outlined, being able to work together to provide the care. The support for paid home care workers is very important. As we know, it is largely a women's profession, and it is largely a profession of very low pay. And this hopes to change that, along with a proposal that we've been very active on. I mentioned a short while ago, the Credit for Caring Act. This provides a tax credit to family caregivers. It's been introduced, it's bipartisan in the Senate, Senators Bennett and Ernst, and in the House as well, and will provide that extra support for family caregivers who typically spend about $7,000 out of pocket in the course of caring for a loved one. There will also be either in the infrastructure bill or in a later piece of legislation, an effort to expand on the paid family leave provisions that were in previous legislation during the pandemic. And again, this is very important, recognizing that people need the flexibility to be able to take time off from their jobs for their own health or for the health of a family member. And then finally, you are seeing through the child tax credit that was included in the last bill and proposals related to childcare or pre-K, a real focus on support for women who have younger children in school. And all of this is important, and all of this is a conversation that has not been very active in the political arena the last few years. So I'd never say we're grateful to the pandemic for anything, but there is a little bit of a silver lining shining a light on these issues, which, as Claudia pointed out earlier, have been around for a long time.
Interesting. Claudia, do you want to come back and comment on anything that Nancy just said? And how important is it that this be part of an infrastructure bill, that we start seeing things differently that way?
So let me also point out that the child care subsidies also reduced child poverty by an enormous amount. Poverty used to be of the elderly. Mm-hmm. That stopped not in terms of the fact that there are no impoverished elderly, but Social Security in the 1930s was the turnaround. And after that, the poor are children. And that's in some sense that both are terrible, but in some sense that's even worse, because it means that their foundations are then worse, and the foundations of that generation growing up are worse. What is infrastructure if not that? What is infrastructure if not the building of human capital of our nation's citizens? So in that sense, the children really should be an important target here, not just because women are the ones who take care of them, but because they are our nation.
It's a rather inspiring conversation, I think. Lawrence, tell us any thoughts about this from your point of view. What could Washington do to help entrepreneurs who are trying to teach these job skills?
I mean, Nancy and Claudia are sharing some really interesting information sort of at the policy level. And I feel like if there's anything that we can do to make sure that the funds that are being dispersed at the federal level find their way to sort of organizations on the front lines who are actually taking action. And there's lots of them, particularly there's a lot of good money going into sort of the caregiving space. There's lots of entrepreneurs that are coming up with interesting ideas about how to support that business, that category, that industry. But getting money to the front lines where it's being actively deployed and really helping people in a way that we can see and measure seems like an important thing to emphasize.
You know, Lawrence makes a very good point about the money that is now flowing out. And there's an area that's tangential a little bit to this discussion where the FCC is now providing money that was in legislation at the end of the year for people to get a little subsidy so they can get internet and they can afford internet. And one thing I've taken away from this period is, if you want to have any quality of life as an older American, you must be online. You have to have some level of digital literacy. Look at how hard it was to get a vaccine appointment if you weren't able to go online. And so I think this whole area of getting more older Americans online, educated to how they can utilize that space and then take advantage of the kinds of services Lawrence and GetSetUp are providing is hugely important. And we're working on that along with others. But it really is a takeaway for me. If you look at the vaccine distribution, it was not top of mind that in order to get a vaccine appointment, you might have to give 1-800 numbers to people or do home visits. Everybody assumed that everybody was online and all you had to do was spend your 7 hours a day clicking through all the websites, and eventually you'd be able to get it. And that just wasn't the case. I think it is one of the profound implications coming out of the vaccine period.
And that was true for education as well, for children that getting access. So
Yeah.
very interesting discussion. Fred, let's get some final thoughts.
Yeah, and if there are other areas, Nancy, in terms of innovation that you've seen, because we know AARP is very involved in helping companies move forward in areas that can help.
Yeah, I think what we've seen is, particularly in healthcare delivery, it used to be there was the kind of healthcare world, and there was the transportation world, and there was the kind of food and services delivery world, and that has all moved together. And so many online, particularly companies and healthcare providers, are looking at the other kinds of services they need to offer. So we've seen a lot of that. Second, the area of getting people literate on technology, how important it is. It's important in terms of getting services, also important in terms of finding a job. Those are areas we've seen a lot of development over the last few months in particular.
And Claudia, are there particular things, I mean, with this wonderful book coming out, with the history of this, what gives you hope?
Very, very good question. I'm almost always an optimist. So what gives me hope is in some sense, my book is about progress. It's about what is impeding the really good story at the end. But it really is about progress. So a century ago, a woman with a college degree had to choose between having a career or a family. And since then, women have made great strides toward achieving both. And yet, of course, challenges remain. And so in my work, I trace how generations of women have responded to the ever-changing constraints during the past century or so, and their continued quest for career and family, and how generations, often grandmother, mother, daughter, have passed down valuable information along this journey. Now, for perhaps the sense of optimism. So I show that many professions and positions are greedy, paying, as I said before, disproportionately more for long hours, weekend work, and how this perpetuates disparities between women and men. But the era of COVID-19, although it magnified many of the issues regarding career and family, the growth of remote and flexible work may be the pandemic's silver lining.
Interesting. Maybe the same question to you, Nancy. What is it here that gives you some hope?
Oh, I'm very hopeful and I'm very optimistic. I think that there's a debate now in the legislative world about any number of issues that have been kind of dormant in that community for the last few years. So I look forward to the continued discussion on infrastructure in this broader definition to include care, paid family leave, caregiving tax credits, home care, support for children. You know, these don't always get talked about as women's issues or women's proposals, but make no mistake, any progress in these arenas will redound to the benefit of women. And that is really what we want to focus on as we think about economic security in the long run.
Lawrence, your turn.
I'm glad you asked that question, Fred. Hope for me is when I see, somebody who perhaps doesn't know how to use their smart device, their laptop, their computer. They take their first class, they get into their first Zoom session, and they end up taking 20, 30, 50 classes, and they become contributors and oftentimes creators, meaning they become folks who lead discussion groups and lead classes and help other women who are going through these very same issues. That gives me hope.
Really wonderful. We appreciate all of you, Claudia, Nancy, Lawrence, for taking the time to be with us in sharing all of this terrific information And we will have links online for the audience to follow. And we look forward to your book coming out this fall, Claudia.
Yeah,
Look
Thanks.
forward to it, Claudia.
yeah.
Thank you all. This was a fantastic conversation, and gives one a sense of optimism of women and their power and their future.
Well, Mary, this was a very important discussion to have with so many older women struggling and COVID making things so much worse for people. What a discussion.
Yes, and to see these new and important concepts about infrastructure and the caring economy and the real reasons why women have financial insecurity and the promise of the future. It was a very good discussion.
And it's interesting that with Nancy being as close as she is to the action going on in Washington is hopeful about this.
I think everyone was hopeful, and also it was very substantive. Fred, I think one of the reasons I found this inspiring was because they understood the data and the facts and the history, but also what's current today and the real opportunity to make a difference in the lives of older women around these issues of financial security, because women do take a hit around childcare, around caregiving, and there's some hope for the future, and also some hope in terms of bridging the digital divide and thinking about all children and their future.
Well, again, we'll have links to some resources at maryfurlong.com/podcast. We appreciate our sponsor for this edition of the podcast, AARP, and thank you for your time to watch or listen.